My name is Gay Gordon Byrne, and I'm the Executive Director of the Repair Association. I'd like to welcome you to our discussion series about fixing for change. We are featuring 3 new books being released this month that focus on repair. A quick intro about our authors, and then we'll get started. Sandra Goldmark is the author of Fixation, How to Have Stuff Without Breaking the Planet. Sandra is a theatrical designer and an associate professor in the theater department at Barnard. She's also the director of campus sustainability and climate action in Barnard. In her spare time, she also started a repair collaboration called a Fixup. So for 7 years, she's been working on Fixup events all over New York City, where volunteers have fixed all sorts of stuff, ranging from lamps and chairs to stuffed lobsters. And I'm assured these were toys and not real lobsters, and in the process, diverted tens of thousands of pounds of waste. John Wackman and Elizabeth Knight co-authored Repair Revolution, How Fixers Are Transforming Our Throwaway Culture. John is the driving force behind what has grown to be more than 30 repair cafes in the Hudson Valley. If you know the area, you'll know that it's pretty rural and it's not a big population center. So this is an amazing, absolutely amazing community event. John says he was able to leverage his experience in television to bring people of diverse backgrounds together in pursuit of a common goal. He has certainly done so. His sense of importance of repair in building community is also very compelling. Lee Vinsel and Andy Russell co-wrote The Innovation Delusion, How Our Obsession with the New Has Disrupted the Work That Matters Most. I really get that. New is very disruptive and not always good. Lee is an assistant professor of science and technology and society at Virginia Tech. Andrew is also a professor. He's a history professor and dean of the College of Arts and Sciences at SUNY Polytechnic. They collaborated on this book to fight back against the notion that innovators are heroes of our time when much of their stuff doesn't work at all without repair and maintenance. I agree entirely with them that repairing things is heroic, not only saving the item, but fighting against entropy. Things break, and we need to be able to fix them. With that, I'm pleased to introduce Nathan Proctor. He's the Right to Repair Director for US PIRG and a very engaged advocate for legislative change. He's going to be speaking with Sandra Goldmark, John Wackman, and Andy Russell.
Thank you so much, Gay, and of course thank you for all that you do to advance the cause of right to repair around the country. Let me start by just introducing myself, a lot of introductions here. So my name is Nathan Proctor. As Gay mentioned, I run the Right to Repair campaign for US PIRG. US PIRG is a national federation of state advocacy organizations that stand up for the public interest whenever our rights, our environment, or our public health are threatened. I've spent my career trying to convince people in power to make decisions that put, the public interest ahead of private special interests, especially when it comes to the long-term prospects of society. I wish that every one of those legislators had read these 3 books, which I think really challenge the core parts of what I think of as our paradigm problem. That we make too much stuff, the world can't sustain the production, the pollution and extraction costs are horrible and destroy lives, we can't process or handle the waste, and most of the stuff that's really valuable gets sidelines to chase after shiny new objects that we largely don't need. And it benefits certain special interests while making the whole system worse. And as these 3 books, I think, take a different approach to the discovery of and exploration of the problems and the solutions at the individual level, what we can do as individuals, what we can do with our communities, and what we need to do at the systemic level in policy. And so I thought I would start with Sandra and just have you talk a little bit about how you got started as a repair practitioner and how your fixation journey started and how you got started fixing.
Sure, thank you. Hi everyone. This is so exciting to see everyone on this one call. It really is a repair party. So my story starts very simply in 2013 with a broken toaster and a vacuum and a lamp and a backpack. So I was home on maternity leave and a bunch of stuff broke around the house, very familiar to many people, I'm sure. And I was kind of stubborn. I didn't really want a new vacuum or toaster or backpack or lamp or whatever. I wanted the old ones to work. So I started calling the manufacturers. Can you fix this? Can you replace the heating element? No, no, no. I was recommended to drive to Hackensack an hour and away with the vacuum. And I thought, this is ridiculous. I'm not going to drive an hour with a newborn and a toddler to get my vacuum fixed. Like, what is happening? Why is it so hard to get these things fixed? And at the same time, I knew that in theater, I'm a theatrical set designer by training. I knew that we fix a lot of things, that it is possible to fix things. If you need that vacuum on stage, it gets fixed and it goes out. So I thought, why do we have this disconnect in the offstage world, in the kind of real world, where we can't get anything fixed? So logically, remember, I was really sleep deprived. I sat down and I wrote a letter to Walmart, and I was like, "Dear Walmart, you need to install a repair shop in the corner of every Walmart. Here's the reasons why you should transform your business model and reconsider the entire global supply chain." And I laid it all out. And my husband, I showed him the letter and I was ready to send it. And he was like, you might need just a little more data, a little more context of why they should listen to this, theatrical set designer. So I was like, fine, we'll do it the slow way. And long story short, we started opening repair shops in New York City. We would hire theater artists to fix a whole range of stuff, from digital and electronic items and appliances, to small furniture, to jewelry, to, yes, toys like stuffed lobsters. And we started fixing and fixing and fixing. And we spent 7 years doing these shops, and most importantly, talking to the customers. And I realized at a certain point that this whole adventure was about a lot more than repair. I realized that it was about this really complex relationship that we have at the individual level with our stuff. And then it was about this really complex, as Nathan said, international, global system, economic system, manufacturing system, logistical system that we have built around our stuff. And those two components eventually turned into this book called Fixation, How to Have Stuff Without Breaking the Planet. And the idea is repair's a way in, and the book tries to acknowledge and honor the complexity of the problem and the complexity of our relationship with stuff, which I don't think is actually a problem or doesn't have to be, and also at the same time find a way forward, a clear path forward for individuals, for businesses, and for policymakers. And for today's conversation, I know we're talking about activism, so I feel like there's some stuff in the book about policy, and there's also this kind of core belief that starting in your home, in your community, at whatever level you're at, can be a sort of platform for activism in a way. And I think we'll get there when we hear from the other authors.
So yeah, I think that your point that repair is a way in. Now, I think that really brings us to, John, your book, Repair Revolution, because I feel like, you're, as somebody who's run and championed free community repair events, you've seen really how the experience of repair is a way in for people to get to a new place. And so I thought maybe you could talk a little bit about, what it was that got you into those free community repair events and how you see community involvement as being, a part of the solution.
Thanks, Nathan. I was reading the New York Times in 2012, and there was an article about this phenomenon that at that point was only in Europe, and it was called Repair Cafe. And, it's one of those ideas that just struck me at the time, so I, kind of figuratively put it in my back pocket and thought, let me see if there might be a time and place. And at that point, I was within a year of moving up to the Hudson Valley from the city. And, and when I got up here, I realized I need a great way to meet people. So carrying the idea of Repair Cafe and describing what it might mean and describing, how it would work and the kinds of skills we would need, it kind of became my passport to my new community. Now, as it turns out, other people around the country read that same New York Times article, and it was, an interview with Martina Postma, who founded the repair cafes in Amsterdam, and by that time they had spread throughout Europe. But within 6 months of that article, there were 4 repair cafes in the U.S. There were 2 on the West Coast and 2 in the Northeast. And so there was something that was very appealing about this idea. And so the question is, well, what is so appealing about this idea? And one answer is that it brings together people who would not otherwise have met, but who have these skills that they see each other practice and they appreciate in each other. So this repair movement, this community repair movement is, yes, it's about fixing stuff, undeniably so, but it is about so much more. And, in the biggest sense, it is about creating community and building community resilience. So Repair Cafe, what is it? A Repair Cafe is a free community meeting place to bring a beloved but broken item to be repaired with an expert who is also your neighbor. And that is the key dynamic, the expert who is also your neighbor. So within any community, you're looking within. Who has skills that they are willing to bring forward and share with their neighbors? And when they do, it's a remarkable experience. So now, there's nothing proprietary about getting a group of people together in a town to fix stuff. You can call it whatever you want. There are repair cafes. There's a tremendous movement of Fixit clinics started by Peter Mewey. And then there are repair labs, repair hubs. There are Fixit Fridays. There are mended sheds. I was just introduced recently in Chicago to the Community Glue Workshop. How about that? But we're all doing the same thing. We are inviting people from the community to come in and sit down with their stuff and then troubleshoot. Oh my gosh, there's something about troubleshooting which to many people is irresistible. But there is this basic insight that we can trace back to Aristotle, that enacting what we know, one of the greatest sources of human enjoyment is enacting our knowledge and sharing our knowledge. So Repair Cafe is about these things. It's about extending the useful life of things that you care about, things that you rely on. It's about satisfying your curiosity about the way things work. It's about using your hands and using tools. It is about all of these things, and it is, reducing waste, sharing knowledge, and making friends. So it's, I have to say that the experience of it is quite extraordinary, and that is why, we say it's a socially vibrant, very creative platform for learning about your own community, and then also building awareness about the challenges that face our planet. I'll leave it at that.
That's fantastic, John. Thank you so much. Yeah, and Andy, you come from a pretty different stream as somebody who was, came at this from a research side. So can you share a little bit about how you came to the same question and you begin to realize that innovation was something with a toxic side to it?
Yeah, it's true that we come from the world of academia more than actual hands-on doing, which is something I really admire about Sandra and John's background. John's mention of friendship is really the starting point for the story of the innovation delusion. It started with a joke. Lee and I had been writing about innovation and technology since we're historians of technology. And in 2014, Walter Isaacson's book called The Innovators came out, and it had this splashy subtitle, How a Group of Hackers, Geniuses, and Geeks Created the Digital Revolution. And for me, this was the tipping point in hearing all this preaching about innovation. And so I dashed off an email to Lee and one of our friends, and I said, I've got it, guys. We've got to write a counter volume called The Maintainers, how a group of standards engineers, introverts, and bureaucrats created technologies that kind of work most of the time. And Lee took it and ran with it. He was blogging at the time, so he wrote a blog post, and some of our friends in the history of technology and science and technology studies community really responded to it. There's a bunch of people who write about infrastructure and standards and all the sort of nitty-gritty sides of technology in that world. And so we held a conference, which is what academics do when their friends respond. We thought a couple dozen of our friends would show up at the place where we worked, Stevens Institute of Technology. It's right across from Manhattan, so it's a good place to draw people in for a conference. And over 100 people registered. And at the same time, the same day as the conference, we published an essay called Hail the Maintainers in Aeon, which is really a call for action to hail the maintainers, why maintenance matters more than innovation. And the combination of those two events triggered some interest that, unbeknownst to us, after joking around, got some coverage from around the world for the ideas in the conference. So we held another conference, as one does, that grew, and in the process we realized we should write a book. So one train of our action is to continue organizing people in this group that we call the Maintainers. We've held yet another conference and try and support communities who are interested in maintenance and repair and upkeep. And the second train was the book, which is The Innovation Delusion. And the objective of that book is to do two things. One is to really point out some of the hilarious parts and almost tragic parts of our obsession with innovation, our cultural obsession with innovation, and the detrimental effects that it has on individuals, on organizations and businesses, and on society at large, where we tend to invest more in the shiny new object than in taking care of, say, water infrastructure. And the second part is really, we weren't content with just a takedown of innovation or Silicon Valley. That's been done. It's pretty well understood amongst the people who want to get it. What we wanted to do is put forward a more positive vision about what a better maintained world, and what a world that features care at its core instead of innovation or destruction, what that can do for people. So the second part of the book really maps the positive things that can happen and the success stories in individuals, in businesses, and at the societal level that a focus on maintenance can do. So that's the work that we're doing. Repair is obviously a big part of it, and we're really fortunate to have met you and the other folks on the call. Looking forward to the rest of the conversation.
Thanks so much, Andy. Yeah, I think when I think about social change, right? When I think about making social change as somebody who's more or less a professional citizen, I think about people's behaviors and their attitudes and values. I think about, the policies, and then I also think about, the markets. And so I thought maybe we could just start with this question of, and maybe we'll start with you, John, at the community level, how do our behaviors and attitudes need to change? And, what signs of hope have you seen that's possible?
Well, it's a mindset. And when you talk about the kinds of individual changes that involve a change of worldview and or on the societal level, a sort of cultural change, this is very hard. This is a steep mountain to climb. I think that when you are in a community repair setting, you're able to have just really kind of exploratory conversations. It just is very it's very tactile. It's right in front of you. One thing that's important to say is that community repair, there's a catch. It is not a drop-off service. You don't leave your stuff and come back and collect it later. You sit down across the table from the guy or the gal who is going to give their attention to the item you have brought. And I should say that the range of repairs, the categories of repair are just about as broad as we can make them. So yes, it's mechanical, electronic, and digital repairs. At the same time, clothing and textile repairs are huge. They're so important. We love to repair toys and mend stuffed animals and fix dolls because that brings kids in. And if you talk with a lot of kids, my girlfriend is a teacher, I talk to a lot of kids, and they what they know of the world is that when something breaks, you get a new one. They do not quite understand that things can be repaired. And that is a little bit, jaw-dropping, to sort of accept that might be the case. And yet, to a degree much larger than we might realize, it is the case. And how have we gotten to this point? Well, that's a long road. But I will say that, community repair is tremendously intergenerational. And that is one of the big benefits. One of the things that's so important to us as organizers of this movement is that community repair allows you to honor the people who have this know-how and give them a place to share it and pass it on, because those are skills, that is savvy, that is know-how that just has to be preserved and shared.
Yeah, and that's something, personally, having gone to some of these events, that you can see is really rewarding for the coaches, right? That they are these skills that they can give to their neighbors, and they get a little recognition out of it.
Yeah, Martina Postner likes to say that so many of those, and we call them repair coaches, and that's very intentional because that indicates the back and forth. It's I'm not showing you, you're showing, you bring an item and you got to tell me the story of that item, And so you might think that people who come to a community repair event, would say, hey, I got it fixed, or hey, it was free. But I will tell you that hands down, the word that people most use to describe their experiences, it was fun.
Sandra, I think your book focuses a lot on the individual relationship, even the spiritual relationship we have to our stuff. How do you think our individual attitudes and behaviors need to change, and where do you see signs of hope?
So I think that in terms of our individual behaviors, one of the things that I think is interesting, and I think this is what John was sort of getting at as well, was the real appetite, the hunger, and even joy that people would have when they would get something fixed. It's like we would have our tents in the farmers market, and people would come by and do this double take and come up to us and say, wait, you fix things? What kinds of things? And they were so curious and so excited, and they wanted to tell us about their grandmother who used to have a button box, and how their uncle used to take apart the dishwasher and put it back together. There was a whole kind of story, a little pent-up energy surrounding this activity that was really fascinating. And what seems like is so distressing to so many people is that our society actually doesn't support that impulse anymore. This goes to Andy and Lee's book, which is that every kind of market force and every economic force, and even some of our really subtle or not so subtle like value systems, reinforce our also natural urge to like shiny and new things, right? Like, there's nothing wrong with liking, occasional shiny new thing. Yay. That's also very human and natural. But we also have a very deep urge, a deep attachment to the things in our lives, a deep need for stuff, like at the individual level and at the species level. Like, as human beings, we need stuff and tools. And it's silly, but it bears saying, because sometimes we don't realize how deep this part of our humanity is. But yet, the urge to kind of very simply keep something that you like is thwarted, is sort of systematically thwarted by our economic systems and by our society, which is kind of a cuckoo place to get to. So in Fixation, one of the things I'm trying to do is to show people that urge is normal, that they actually have that urge, and show them some individual steps they can take in terms of changing the way they shop, changing the way they think about the stuff in their lives, and also some of the steps that need to be taken in other arenas. You can't do it all on your own. But as an individual, you can start, and you can begin to basically change the way you shop. You can incorporate care into your mentality of stuff. And in some ways, the very first step for me is acknowledging, hey, stuff is like part of my life, just like food. I'm never going to not have stuff. So let's kind of accept it. Let's not try to struggle with like feelings of clutter shame or guilt or purging or minimalism or, like let's accept the reality that we need stuff, and then let's begin to find ways to do it better.
And this really gets to the innovation delusion. When we think of the only real ownership in society as the ownership that Tim Cook and Apple have, or the ownership that the engineers and software developers have, and not the other people who participated in the process. And I would say legally, none of those people that you just mentioned were part of that process. The planet doesn't have much of a right. The actual technicians who assembled the product don't have, the retail people who sold it, the technicians who repaired it, the people who keep it in their home. Because that relationship is being pushed to be one where we all kind of, the operation of the thing is mostly controlled by the intentions of the manufacturer, and I see some really dangerous side effects to that, and I see this all the time. One really common way that I experience this, and I'm sorry if I'm kind of getting into a wormhole myself here, is people who say they get their phones on a plan where they get to upgrade on a schedule, and they've completely lost the relationship between the damage to the planet done to produce the phone. It's a slight convenience improvement for them to upgrade, and they don't think about the cost. And to me, that's part of the downside to obscuring ownership and that relationship. So I don't know if this will make the story here, but I immediately responded to that question that you put forward, or that description you put forward, about our relationship to stuff, and how when it goes wrong and we don't feel a sense of responsibility, we start to do crazy things. But let me actually get a question to Andy here. This is an interesting conversation. I got to try not to be too interested. So Andy, the other piece that I think is really important is recognizing that this kind of fascination with new things and this loss of relationship to repair really impacts the broader, like, basically paradigm, the systemic way that even our cities are planned. So I thought maybe you could talk a little bit about how what attitudes for our policymakers need to change, and then also where you see signs of hope for that getting better.
Yeah, good question. One of the common themes as we move across these different levels, even in this conversation, from the individual to this longue durée planetary scale, has to do with short-term thinking. And that's really something that we hone in on in the book, because it's present in individual consumer decisions about buying stuff, present in business decisions to go for short-term profit so they can maximize their shareholder value each quarter, instead of thinking about the long-term benefits to their own business, about investing in people, investing in R&D, investing in their communities. And it's the same for elected officials. Lee and I talk about the ribbon cutting paradox, where elected officials don't get credit for making sure that something works the way it's supposed to work, whether it's a transportation system or a sewer or water system. But those pictures getting in front of a new building with a golden shovel or the oversized scissors in a new building, those make the newspaper. And so, it connects with what Sandra was saying. There's definitely incentives around to push people towards short-term thinking, and there's probably something to it that there's something innate in what we do to pay attention to short-term incentives more than long-term. But I do see signs of hope, and it comes from the glimmers of recognition at all of these levels that short-termism just isn't good enough. So just think about individuals and think about we know that we need to eat right and exercise and clean up after ourselves and take care of our surroundings because it's good for us. Even though I like to eat donuts for breakfast and lunch and dinner for that matter, it's just not sustainable. Successful businesses understand this as well. It's not just a matter of a big launch and a big IPO. It's how do you build products that last? How do you build that relationship with a customer? How do you build that relationship with investors in the community? And I think elected officials understand it as well, at least those who talk about sustainability, those who talk about things like intergenerational justice, and those who are thinking not just about getting elected in 2 years or 4 years or 6 years like they do in this country, but what they can give back to the community. So part of what we want to do in our book is to point to those positive examples, highlight them as exemplars of a maintenance mindset, and encourage people that there's a better way out there than just the consumerist drivel that's pushed at us constantly every day.
One thing I think is really interesting is I do think the kind of growing awareness and acceptance of climate change is a little bit helping, work at that short-termism in an interesting way. And yet at the same time, when we talk about climate change, there still is a real rush to what's the innovative, shiny, new silver bullet solution, like where's the golden scissor that I'm going to fix climate change with. So it's interesting to see, to watch as the climate change conversation changes, is it possible for this concept of maintenance to become part of the broader conversation about big scale solutions to climate change? I hope it is.
Yeah, it's a spirit of stewardship and care that we see in all the people that you have met and the things that you've met. It's the same idea. And I think that's what bears repeating. It's the same idea.
Yeah.
We talk about that certainly in our world, which is, when we take up repair, we initiate a conversation about care. And that is caring for our stuff, but caring also for each other, for our communities, and for our planet. So it just, it expands the rings out and to include all of us.
Absolutely. So one question I have is, how do lawmakers need to change? What are the things, what are the policies and the approaches that they need to shift as we try to take on a throwaway system and all the problems that it causes?
Well, it almost seems at this point that, we would be justified in injecting a note of anger. And, the first way that I became aware of iFixit and the work that Kyle is doing was through the Repair Manifesto. And, so this is really an expression of, I used to be able to fix these things, and I can no longer, and I want it back. Damn it. It's this loss of agency, this loss of ability to fix the things that we own. And I think there is a strong feeling that we want to take it back.
I have my laundry list of 4 legislative things I want to see happen that are super specific. So I'm going to put them out there into the world in case anybody's taking notes anywhere. 1, pay as you throw trash pickup. That is a clear, simple policy that we could enact in municipalities across the country. Some of them have it already. It works. Pay as you throw. 2, sales tax or tax incentives to make it easier to actually make a living at reuse and repair, right? If we hadn't had to pay sales tax in New York State on our repair shops, we would have doubled our very slim profits. They have this in Sweden. It's a very simple policy way to support repair. national and international labor standards, right? We're never going to be repair. It's going to be very hard for it to compete when wages for manufacturing are so low internationally. Same thing for standards for repairability, durability, and materials. And then the last thing is a little like less specific, but it's sort of a page from Andy and Lee's book, is let's fund maintenance, right? Let's think about that. And maybe Andy has a specific policy of how to do that.
No, I don't. I mean, we are skeptical of a $1 trillion plus stimulus bill that will just end up in building new stuff with no funding and no even thought given to maintenance. And so, that's if there's going to be a stimulus or infrastructure bill that actually passes of that magnitude, it really needs to take maintenance into account. Chuck Marone at Strong Towns has done great advocacy around this. I would also say that, we shouldn't wait for the federal government to bail us out. I think a lot of people from my part of the world, from academia, like to come up with a well thought out system and then have the authority from on high enact it. It's not going to happen, and it's probably unwise. So community action, I think, is really important, distributed action. And the third thing that I would say has to do with respect for the workers, who in the last 6 months or 7 months of the pandemic some of them have been rebranded as essential workers, and I think we're seeing their contributions honored and respected. There's also unpaid labor that happens at home, primarily by female caregivers, that needs to be respected and better compensated in some ways. And the essential workers also tend to be predominantly women, predominantly ethnic or racial minoritized groups. And so there's an element of justice here as well that I think is really important to point out. And when you ask those people what they want things like reliable health care, child care, education for their communities. Those are very basic issues that I think should be thought about more as rights. We talk about the right to repair. I think healthcare is rights, education is rights, is what the people who maintain our society deserve. And so those are causes I would advocate for, no matter who's advocating for them.
Let's start with the problems of a throwaway culture, right? And basically who wins and who loses with our relationship with stuff. I think, Andy, you were just talking about, the people who do the maintenance, not getting, the respect or the resources they need. And Sandra, you had talked earlier about, the damage to the planet, but and I know this is something you explore in your book too, which is, our stuff costs something, and it costs people something to make it.
Well, I love what Andy said earlier about there's a connection between the COVID moment and essential workers and what we're seeing about people getting paid or not getting paid for childcare, for home care. We are seeing in the COVID moment how much work childcare is and what happens when that is not built in any reliable way. And so on the one hand, you say, well, what's the link to that between like fixing my blender or my stuffed lobster, right? That's not important. That's not essential. No, it's not essential. Like, you can get through the pandemic without your stuffed lobster. But what is essential is that core value of saying, wait, this is an activity and a mindset that we actually need to elevate and pay for, right? And that doesn't just mean you always have to pay for repair. I'm a big fan of repair cafes and do it yourself and paying for it. Like, I think it's all part of the ecosystem. But the key, and Mir Lauderman-Eukelis, this artist that I think both Andy and I mention in our books. I don't know if, John, you've got her in yours too, but she does an amazing job of drawing in her artwork, drawing a really explicit connection between things like childcare, housework, cleaning, and the bigger, sanitation work, maintaining the New York City subway. She lays it all out, how this is all the same body of work. And that is what I think is like so exciting to understand those connections. And that is what I think is like really going to be important in the COVID moment and in the next level of dealing with climate change.
Yeah. One thing I'd love to hear you touch on, Andy, is how we got stuck in a growth is the solution to every problem, and how we can, what are the best ways to kind of build a support for the assumption that fixing is the first solution.
Yeah, I mean, I think it starts from where these other two folks were started. At the beginning of our conversation, that just making new stuff is an essential kind of impulse of businesses. And there's historical roots. There's a historical story that we tell in Innovation Delusion, really starts after World War II in the United States, and the rise of pent-up energy for materialism. Or material things, not materialism like in the Marxist sense. And, refrigerators, ovens, you name it, TVs, it all kind of burst. And that was the measure of success, even not only for families, affluent families, but in the kitchen debates between Nixon and Khrushchev, where our stuff is better than your stuff. It took on this veneer of superiority. And yeah, I think somehow along the way, the notion of the mechanic being the figure like Rosie the Riveter, right, from World War II, just before that era started, of the mechanic being the actual hero instead of the product designer or the marketer or the advertiser, that was lost somewhat. And I don't think it's overly romantic to say that, let's rehabilitate the image of Rosie and the mechanics that kept the early Industrial Revolution going. But I think there's that spirit in everyone, and I think, to go back to the discussion about the pandemic, we've kind of been forced into that role in some ways, simply because there's not as many people who can come out and fix stuff in our houses. So I think there's a little bit of a self-reliance that might have kicked in here, at least among the people who I talk to and in my own household. So, whether this is a long-term... What's that, John? That's right. Yeah, whether this is a long-term shift, whether it can push back the tide of cheap stuff is a different question, but I'm optimistic.
Yeah, make do mend. One metaphor that you use in your book, Sandra, which I find just really, really provocative, is the relationship between us and food being similar to our relationship to stuff. And and kind of why we understand that more calories isn't better, but for some reason more stuff, we've kind of gotten stuck in this more stuff trap. You want to talk a little bit more about how you came to that?
Yeah, I was just thinking about that during this last little thread about how because we're all fixers and we're so excited about fixing, we're really focusing on that part of the cycle. But I know that all of our books understand and look at the way that point on the cycle relates to everything else, like the next conversation about design, is the design and repair connected? And we have all dealt with end-of-life questions of recycling and breaking it down. So the food is just stuff analogy I just sort of realized that it's consumption, right? It's things that the earth produces, resources that we transform with human labor, and then we put them in our bodies or we bring them into our home. And then at some point, those resources, were sort of done with them and they move back out into the ecosystem in some form or another. And so I started thinking, well, if we need to have a kind of stuff movement, which I think we do, let's look to the food movement for some clues here, because the basic processes are the same and the food movement has been around for a long time, and there's lots of smart people who've been thinking about consumption in terms of food. And I also think that for somebody who's not really already clued in or already super excited about thinking about consumption or repair, the analogy to food makes it really easy to sort of be like, oh yeah, I can do this. I'm already, many Americans are already aware that your consumption of food impacts your own health and happiness, it impacts your waistline, and it impacts the planet and the people who grow the food. got a little kid climbing under the table. So Eric, can you stop bonking the table? Anyway, that connection between food and stuff is I mean, it's really the foundation for the whole book, but it's also something that I think is a way to simplify the problem and say, hey, we kind of know what to do. We need to look at all the steps on the cycle, and we need to understand how the steps are related to each other.
I know, that was really, really well put. I loved that. And one point I want to just tie together as we close is that, we talk about repair and the right to repair, our ability to fix stuff. But the reason why we advocate for that is because we understand that all these things are connected. That when you fix something, it changes your relationship to that thing. And we need to change our relationship to that thing. And, whether that's, if you fix something and then someone's like, hey, I made a 2% better version of that thing, you should upgrade. If you fixed it, there's something about you which says, no, I just want to maintain the one that I have because I have something invested in it. And if you think about our stuff like food, you realize that, maybe it's not an extra charge in my cell phone plan to get a new phone, but it is a charge, right? There's damage. Like this came from somewhere, and I'm doing damage to the planet and to myself by just kind of thoughtlessly consuming it. And then also just that repair as something that builds bonds to people and our communities, and is a way to honor people who have taken the time to learn skills. So I think that's my takeaway, which continues to be that this is not an issue that's isolated to just our smartphones or other pieces of electronics. This is really about a holistic view of how we treat stuff and each other. If you really think about it, if you were in charge, you would do it way differently than is being done. And of course, by which I say, like, there's so much more in these books that talks about, just what we need to do differently and why, examples of why this is a problem and examples of how people are solving it. And I encourage everybody to go out and get a copy of these books and read them and to share their insights and to help all of us build a better planet where we have less stuff, it does less damage, and we have more connection.